Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, exactly 100 years ago, on this very floor, the United States declared war on Imperial Germany and entered the First World War on the side of the Allies. The decisions that led to that monumental declaration forever changed America's destiny, economy, military, foreign policy, and culture. Today also marks the beginning of our national centennial remembrance of America's service in World War I. For the sacrifices made by all Americans, and for more than 250,000 American casualties, including over 100,000 dead, most of which were lost in a mere 6-month period from May to November 1918. By war's end, my great-grandfather and his 3 brothers would all serve. My great-grandfather's brother, my uncle Frank Chamberlain, was killed in action. This was his pipe that he was carrying when he was killed in France, his dog tags, his uniform insignia that I was able to inherit from my great-grandfather. He lays peacefully in France under a white marble military gravestone with a scant faceless hint of the man who once filled with laughter and humor, who held dreams, hopes, and goals for the future. Frank was 19 years old. April 6, 1917, our country was forever changed, and it began right here on this very floor. It is only fitting, Mr. Speaker, that we give remembrance to its beginning here today. I'm indebted to the fine work of Dr. Eric B. Setzekorn of the United States Army's Center of Military History for his material from Joining the Great War, which forms the basis for today's remembrance. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria on the 28th of June, 1914, led to the military mobilization across Europe and declarations of war by early August, most Americans took solace that the Atlantic Ocean shielded the United States from the conflict. The Chicago Herald summed up popular support for isolation from Europe's strife in its article that said, quote, "Peace-loving citizens of this country will now rise up and tender a hearty vote of thanks to Columbus for having discovered America," end quote. Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium brought Great Britain into the war and divided Europe into 2 great camps. Britain joined France and Russia to form the Triple Entente, more commonly referred to as the Allied powers. Opposed to them were Germany and Austria-Hungary, making up the Central Powers. President Woodrow Wilson believed that the immoral nature of European politics created entangling alliances that transformed a regional conflict into a global war that threatened world peace. The President delivered a declaration of neutrality to this very Congress on the 19th of August, 1914, calling on all citizens to remain, quote, "impartial in thought as in action," end quote. However, between late 1914 and early 1917, the escalating conflict tested American traditions of isolationism as it threatened to draw the nation closer to the war. The initial German offensive against France ended in September at the Battle of the Marne, after which both sides attempted a series of flanking maneuvers to gain advantage. Neither side proved capable of overcoming the killing power of machine guns and rapid-firing artillery, and they brought the offensive battle lines to a halt along the Western Front as it stabilized into a vast system of trenches stretching from Switzerland all the way to the English Channel. This was a new type of warfare, with soldiers subjected to prolonged stress and danger with little chance of daring heroics or martial glory. Behind the trenches, the development of sophisticated supply systems that were able to support millions of men and massive levels of firepower, and the ability to rush reserves to block any potential enemy breakthrough led to a vicious stalemate. On the broad expanses of the Eastern Front, Germany and Austria were locked in a brutal war of attrition with Russia, where logistics and artillery shells counted far more than bravery. To break the deadlock, the combatants attempted to smash through the enemy lines with ever larger offensives. Attacks in 1915 saw tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of artillery pieces deployed along only a few miles of front, trying to win through sheer weight of numbers and ordnance. The result was thousands of dead and gains measured in yards after weeks of constant fighting. Poison gas, first by the Germans in April 1915 and later adopted by every nation, added to the daily misery and danger. By 1916, as the industrial economies of Germany, France, and Britain became fully geared towards war production, battles increased in scale and destructiveness. In the fight over the fortress of Verdun, between February and December, the French and Germans suffered more than 1 million casualties combined. On the first day of the Somme offensive, on the 1st of July, 1916, the British and French fired more than 2 million artillery shells into the German lines in support of 19 divisions attacking along only a 20-mile front. Despite this colossal weight of numbers, the British alone suffered 57,000 casualties on the very first day and did not break the German defenses. By the time the Somme ended in mid-November, all sides had suffered more than a combined 1 million casualties, while the front moved fewer than 10 miles. As a result, Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with the slaughter and destruction that defined the Western Front. As the stalemate in France continued, U.S. political and public opinion began to shift from neutrality towards support for the Allies. German atrocities in Belgium, at times exaggerated by Allied propaganda, shocked many Americans. Additionally, in early 1915, the Germans began an effort to isolate the British Isles by using submarines, known as Unterseeboote, or U-boats, to attack British merchant shipping. The German campaign, which consisted of the unrestricted sinking of any merchant vessel bound for Britain, was portrayed by American newspapers as a cowardly and immoral method of warfare. On the 1st of May, 1915, a German the British liner, the RMS Lusitania, killing 1,198 men, women, and children, including 128 American citizens on board. After the attack, the New York Times called on President Wilson to, quote, demand that the Germans shall no longer make war like savages drunk with blood, end quote. Fearing that such action could pull the United States into the war and concerned over British violations of American shipping rights, President Wilson continued his policy of neutrality. Seeking to take the moral high road, he proclaimed, quote, there is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There is such a thing as a nation being so right that it does not need to convince others by force that it is right, end quote. However, the Germans sank the French passenger ferry SS Sussex in March 1916. Wilson threatened to break off diplomatic relations with Germany. In May, the Germans pledged to abandon unrestricted submarine warfare, though they reserved the right to attack legitimate targets such as armed merchant ships or those vessels carrying war material. As Germany's submarine campaign demanded its relations with the United States, America's economic relationship with Britain and France expanded. Faced with a war of attrition, the Allies relied on American agricultural and industrial resources to support their war efforts. Despite a British blockade that severely cut American commerce with its friendly relations to the former Central Powers, U.S. trade with Europe more than doubled from 19